Today, I'm going to be talking about a history of the guillotine. When most people hear the word guillotine, they immediately think of the French Revolution, or violence, chaos, and public executions. It is often seen as a symbol of brutality. But what is surprising is that the guillotine was actually created with the intention of being more humane. Which is even more shocking is its last use was in 1977, the same year the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, was released. So while people were watching futuristic space battles in theaters, France was still using an execution method designed in the 1700s. So today I'll explain how the guillotine started as a symbol of equality and progress, and how it became associated with fear and political control, and what its history reveals about justice, society, and human behavior. To understand why the guillotine was created, we need to look at what executions were like before it existed. In the 1600s and early 1700s, punishment was extremely unequal. Your method of execution depended almost entirely on your social class. If you were a noble, you were usually executed by beheading with a sword. This method, while still violent, was considered more honorable and often quicker. But if you were a commoner, your fate was much worse. You could be hanged, burned alive, or broken on a wheel, a process that could take hours and cause extreme suffering. Executions were also public events. Large crowds would gather, and these punishments were meant to entertain as much as they were to enforce the law. This system was clearly unfair and brutal. As Enlightenment ideas began spreading, more people started to question whether justice should really depend on wealth or status. This growing discomfort created the demand for a more equal and less painful method of execution. This is where Joseph Guillotin comes in. Guillotin was not an executioner or an inventor. He was a doctor and a politician who actually opposed the death penalty. He believed that taking a life was morally wrong. However, during the French Revolution, he realized that abolishing the death penalty immediately was not realistic. So instead, he suggested a compromise. If executions were going to happen, they should at least be quick, consistent, and equal for everyone. He proposed the idea of a machine that could carry out executions in a standardized way, removing the chance of human error and reduce suffering. Ironically, even though the guillotine was named after him, Guillotin himself never built it and reportedly disliked being associated with it. The guillotine was deeply rooted in Enlightenment philosophy, which was one of the most influential intellectual movements in European history. During this time, thinkers emphasized reason, science, and human rights over tradition and inherited power. Philosophers like Voltaire and Immanuel Kant challenged the idea that kings or nobles had special authority simply because of their birth. Instead, they argued that government and law should be based on fairness and rational thinking. This is where the idea that all men are created equal began to seriously influence political systems and laws. So the guillotine emerged as a physical expression of this philosophy. If all citizens were equal in life, they should also be equal in death, like removing the class punishments entirely. Like I said, execution methods before depended on social class, wealth, reputation. So supporters of this machine argued that it was actually more humane than traditional methods. They believed that the idea was instant, it reduced unnecessary suffering and fear, and in their view, slow and painful executions were a form of cruelty that had no place in a rational society. There's also a strong focus on removing the spectacle of death. Public executions had often been used as entertainment, even since ancient times, with crowds gathering to watch. The guillotine was designed to make execution more clinical and less theatrical. The actual design of the guillotine was created by Antoine Louis, and it was built by Tobias Schmidt, a German craftsman. They both focused on making the machine as efficient and reliable as possible. There were some earlier versions of beheading devices out there, but they often failed or required multiple attempts. One of the most important improvements was the angled blade. Instead of a straight edge, the slanted blade allowed for a cleaner and faster cut. The machine was tested on animals to make sure it worked every time. The guillotine was first used in 1792. The first person executed was Nicolas Jacques Pelletier, who had been convicted of highway robbery. The execution itself was extremely fast, much faster than what people were used to. Interestingly, the crowd that gathered to watch was actually disappointed. They expected a dramatic, drawn-out event, but instead it was over almost instantly. This shows that people became used to violence as entertainment, but despite what the people thought, the government saw the guillotine as a success. It was efficient and consistent, and looked like it reduced suffering. So because of this, it became the official execution method in France. In 1793, the guillotine was used in one of the most important moments in history, the execution of Louis XVI. This event symbolized a major shift in power. For centuries, kings were believed to rule by divine right, meaning their authority came from God. But by executing the king using the same method as any other citizen, the revolutionaries made a powerful statement, like saying no one is above the law. Later that year, Marie Antoinette was also executed. These events marked the end of the monarchy and the rise of a new political system based on equality. However, they also showed how revolutionary ideals could lead to extreme actions. The guillotine became most infamous during the Reign of Terror. During this time, approximately 17,000 people were executed in France. The government, led by Maximilien Robespierre, used the guillotine as a tool to eliminate enemies and maintain control. Anyone suspected of opposing the revolution could be arrested and executed, often without strong evidence. Fear spread rapidly throughout society. People began to distrust one another and accusations became common. Ironically, Robespierre himself was eventually arrested and executed by the same guillotine. According to Sophie Wanek, and in her book, In Defense of the Terror, Liberty or Death in the French Revolution, public vengeance was a way of elaborating values and putting them to the test. So this means when people they carried out the punishments in public, it wasn't just about hurting the criminal, it was also about showing what society believes in and testing those beliefs. During the revolution, the guillotine became more than a tool, it also became part of pop culture. It appeared on jewelry, clothing, and even household items. Some restaurants created themed menus, and toy guillotines were made for children. It sounds strange, but it shows how normalized the violence had become. People were exposed to executions so frequently that they began to see it as ordinary. This desensitization is important because it shows that this exposure to violence changes how people can think and feel. After the chaos of the revolution, executions became more organized. The role of the executioner became an official position, often referred to as a Monsieur de Paris. One well-known family, the Sanson family, carried out executions for generations. The guillotine itself was also improved and standardized. It was even painted darker colors to make blood less visible, which shows the effort they made to make executions less shocking. The guillotine was not limited to just France. In Nazi Germany, a similar device called the Fabel was used to execute around 16,000 people. Many of the victims were political prisoners or members of the resistance. One well-known example was Sophie Scholl, who was executed for speaking out against the Nazi regime. This shows that even in the 20th century, the guillotine was still being used as a tool of government control. The last public execution in France took place in 1939. The person executed was Eugene Weidmann. The crowd behaved in a chaotic and disrespectful way, treating the execution like entertainment. Because of this, the government decided to end public executions. From that point on, executions were carried out inside prisons away from the public view. The final use of the guillotine occurred in 1977. The last person executed was Hamida Djabou in Marseille, France. This was the last execution in Western Europe. It's surprising to me to think like this device, which was created during the Enlightenment, was still being used in the 70s. This moment also marked the end of the guillotine's long history. In 1981, France officially abolished the death penalty. Looking back, the guillotine started as humane and progressive, but over time it became a political control tool and a symbol of fear. The history of the guillotine reminds me that and us that technology is not inherently good or bad. It depends on how we use it, and even something designed with good intentions can have bad consequences. Here's my works cited page with both a peer-reviewed journal article and a book.